Nettle and the End Times. Plant spirit, Mars medicine, and the fight for life on Earth. Section 1. What plant meets this moment? There's a silence in the air these days, an uneasy quiet, laced with the loudest moment I think I've ever borne witness to in this world. This is no peace. This is not true silence, it's something else. A pressure drop, perhaps, like the quiet after a siren or before a storm. A quality of silence that comes on the tail of collective distraction, of the news cycle scrolling past genocide and rewiring us to receive it as just another war, and of the algorithm politely redirecting us back to skincare and millennial moms with an algorithmic grasp on irony, singing Shania Twain and Usher's thong song in perfectly orchestrated loops. It's the quiet that lingers like ash on the tongue when the news feeds roll by bodies buried in rubble while we wait in line at Starbucks. And yet the crisis is too elusive to name for most. This crisis that is writing itself on the walls, but which we seem too often to shy away from diagnosing. Colonization, patriarchy, and late-stage capitalism. These are no abstractions. This scaffolding of suffering, these architectures of collapse that would have us believe that there's no alternative. We live in this hellish reality where influencer content overlays Russian tanks on Ukrainian hills with enough comic irony to slice through the tragedy somehow. Where the algorithm spins faster and faster as Casa burns and as billionaires siphon more power into thin air, and as climate collapse looms over our collective neck like a second sun. And as our own attention scatters like breadcrumbs on scorched earth. This moment rages like a contradiction, distraction, weaponized, detachment, normalized. And under all of that, the kind of grief that makes your bones ache. It's grief, yes, but anger too. Rage. Something else too, an ambient numbness. A kind of blasted detachment where we know the world is on fire, but we don't know what to do with the signal because it's too scrambled, and our own defense mechanisms are too built up to protest, to raise our voices, to join in any coherent way. There's a seductive little message making the rounds these days, too, that we should only be concerned with what we can control. That to pay attention to an orange totalitarian creep, or the climate disaster, or the current whipsaw of social tension and geopolitical violence is to be futile, or worse, a uselessly outraged witness to the unraveling. A waste of your energy. That what happens over there in Gaza or Congo or Sudan or Yemen or in the Amazon basin is somehow irrelevant to what is happening in our own backyards. That it's somehow nobler or more practical to focus only on what we can change in the world immediately around us. That it's better to focus on our own soil, compost, breath work, parenting, nervous systems, as if we're somehow not formed and shaped by what happens in the collective field. But this is a dangerous ambivalence, a false signal. It masquerades as groundedness, when in truth it's a privilege, a corrosive, isolating one, that allows one to mistake distance for connection, that allows the insulated to scroll past suffering under the auspice of staying in their lane, that trains us to retreat into individualism when we need collective will most of all. Because freedom is not so local. Because the fight for freedom anywhere is tangled up for the fight for freedom everywhere. Because the survival of Earth's forest and waters is braided up with the survival of her people. Because the numbness that takes over our hearts and bodies when we tune out suffering in other places will sooner or later seep into the edges of our own lives as if freedom were something that could be compartmentalized. As if our own nervous systems are somehow detached from a child pulled from the rubble. As if the screams of Palestine don't echo through every single one of us still reaching for justice. It's the ideology of detachment disguised as self-care. But it's a dangerous myth, a privilege so complete it confuses numbness with peace. We are not meant to turn away. We are not separate from the struggle. We're certainly not exempt. Surveillance is already in our pockets. Fascism is already testing the locks. Climate collapse is not a metaphor. It's our atmosphere, our food systems, our lungs, our entire economy, for those of you only interested in the bottom line. To turn away from the plight of the oppressed is to give consent to your own cage being built quietly in the background. To draw the curtain while the fire spreads. To mistake insulation for liberation. People are right to say that the human spirit wasn't built for this. Not this flood of violence, not this inundation of information, not this racking undoing of everything we thought was order. Our nervous systems were shaped by slow mornings and fires by our ancestors, not by genocides unfolding in a pocket-sized screen in real time. We are made to track the scent of rain, not scroll past bombed hospitals while waiting in line for coffee. But what if witnessing is the bare minimum of a soul still incarnate? What if registering the pain of the world without flinching, without transmuting it into content or closure, is the only meaningful spell we can cast in a moment like this? The quantum field only responds to coherence. The more we allow the grief of the world to register in our nervous systems, not as panic, but as resonance, the more possibility we unlock. Not because feeling is a substitute for action, but because it's the only place from which any action worth taking can begin. And if the human spirit wasn't made to carry this weight alone, then maybe that's the call for us to carry it together. We are not meant to grieve in isolation. We are not meant to metabolize madness in silence. If we are to hold coherence in the face of collapse, it will be through linking arms and algorithms. Through remembering that we are one body much larger than our own, and that the only way through the shadow is side by side, facing it, while there is still time. So I turn, as I often do, to the plants, whispering to them, praying with them, asking, who meets this moment? Nettle was the first to appear. Not with tenderness, not with grace, but with a jolt, a sting, a throb under the skin. Nettle does not ask permission to be received. She comes as sensation, burning, itching, uncomfortable, undeniably present. Nettle has no patience for niceties, no interest in lulling anyone into acceptance. They want you alert, blood moving, spine upright, deliberate. They ask for attention, spiritually, yes, but also biologically. It's not a meditation on metaphor here, but if we are to meet this moment, maybe it's time to find a plant whose very cellular makeup resists sedation. A plant whose vibration in the field is a clarion call, whose presence doesn't soothe, but galvanizes. In the pages that follow, we'll meet Nettle through soil and story, science and struggle, held up to the fire of Mars, myth and resistance and repair, not to glorify the sting so much as stay with it long enough to feel what it's pointing toward. Because sometimes the pain is the portal. Sometimes it's what hurts that shows us what's still alive. Section 2, Mars in the plant realm. In both medical and planetary astrology, Mars rules heat and inflammation. Sharpness and points, blood and bleeding, war and iron, instinct and the will to survive. It's the ruler of the muscles and the adrenal response. It signals the charge to fight rather than flee. If there's one thing that medicine and the cosmos share, it's this language of metaphor turned matter turned medicine. Why do plants correspond with planets? Not for poetic flourish, but because of pattern, deep observation. Old lineages speaking the same language of plant gestures and tastes and appearances and chemistries and finding them echoed in the celestial bodies. The root systems of Western, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and indigenous medical lineages all speak the same pattern language through their own healing traditions. Some plants bear the signature of Mars more than others. Plants that bristle, plants that burn, plants that move the blood, plants that don't coax but challenge. And nettle is one of them. Iron-rich, covered in tiny hypodermic needles pumping a sting of formic acid, histamine, and serotonin. They flush stagnation, demand presence, and increase circulation. As my friend and teacher Sage Papam writes, the plants ruled by Mars are often acrid and sharp. Stimulants, irritants, and blood movers, they have a sharp, challenging action and are traditionally used to stimulate digestion and circulation. Nettle is one of the most exemplary Mars plants we have. There is no softness in this archetype. There is confrontation, clarity, a kind of turning numbness into action. Nettle is forged in this fire. Today, the planet Mars inspires a deep sort of irony of our times. Rocket ships built under the guise of innovation, tech empires, billionaires obsessed with escape velocities while they hoard up what little is left. Bunker plans built in New Zealand caves, a counterfeit imprint from the red planet, one that flees rather than fights. Recently, author Naomi Klein was interviewed by Democracy Now! And spoke to this moment with a rare sort of clarity, naming what so many people feel but haven't been able to fully put into words, that we're being run by an ascendant but extremely narrow class of sociopaths who believe the world is ending, or, if not believe it, are actively trying to bring it to an end. An apocalyptic consensus is strangling the globe, and what unites the elite players is a bewilderingly logical stance, depending on their preference, either religious rapture logic or bunker economics nihilism. All of it making a killing by betting against the world as we know it. And yet, as Klein points out, this is also the moment to build the broadest political coalition in history, the most clear, simple rallying cry we may ever have. Faith in a future worth fighting for. Not a utopia, not a perfect world, just a livable one. A world with breathable air and drinkable water, unbombed hospitals and unburned Amazon. A world where the earth still comes first. Nettle does not run. They root deeper. They volunteer in war-torn soils, vacant lots, the fractured gaps in pavement. They don't ask who caused the destruction. They ask, who's still here? Not to comfort, but to offer a searing vitality, heat, ferocity, coherence. Nettle reminds us there's a Mars that stays, one that does not need a rocket ship, one that bleeds for something worth protecting. Section 3, Sting as Medicine. Nettle's sting doesn't just warn. It delivers this narrow dose of a jolt, a concentrated current of memory, a voltage of awakening to the forlorn and sluggish state. In Vitalist herbalism, we use nettle for folks in cold, depressed, or damp, stagnant tissue states. Not metaphor. This is a physiological state that mimics our emotional and cultural ones as well. Fun, right? Cold, depressed, think low circulation, poor digestion, fatigue, apathy, collapse. Damp and stagnant, think sluggish elimination, brain fog, toxic buildup, grief with no movement. There's an ancient practice called urtication, named after Nettle's Latin name, Urtica dioica, and popular in many cultures and regions for millennia, that was never just folk medicine. It was more like an invocation. Practiced in Eastern Europe, the British Isles, South America, parts of Asia, urtication used the sting of nettle or other stinging plants to wake up paralyzed limbs, stagnant circulation, depressive states. It was known that to move through suffering, the body first had to be shaken. That sometimes the medicine doesn't soothe, it insists. In Vitalist systems, urtication was often used to shift cold, depressive tissue states. Conditions marked by stagnation and collapse, these are states which now bear frequent links to autoimmune dysfunction of all types. Conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, where systemic inflammation and immune misfiring trace back to depletion, gut dysbiosis, damp and stagnant patterns. Herbalists across Europe and North America have long traded anecdotal evidence for folks, especially elders with joint pain or chronic inflammatory conditions, who see marked difference in mobility, sense of warmth, and energy after a session or two of urtication. While modern clinical research is minimal, preliminary studies and ethnobotanical histories point towards nettle's stinging trichromes, activating peripheral circulation, spurring lymphatic flow, and modulating inflammatory response via histamine and formic acid release. In a world defined by autoimmune collapse, within our bodies, between our neighbors, across our nations, this work asks us, what if sometimes the body needs to be jarred? What if some pain is the body's insistence on reconnection? What if the sting is not cruelty, but initiation? The sting returns sensation to what's gone numb. Nettle barrels in, a tonic, a stimulant, an alterative, a blood builder. They're not for everyone. They're not always gentle, but they carry a clear message. Feel this. Wake up. Choose to be here. Feed the adrenals, nourish the kidneys, clear the skin, strengthen the gut. Remind the immune system what to defend. And in the spring, when the earth begins to stir, they rise from their deep winter sleep together. For this reason, traditional herbalists harvested nettle in the early spring. They're a seasonal ally, metabolizing the energetic shift from winter dormancy to spring awakening. Archaeologists have found strands of nettle cloth buried in Bronze Age grave sites, evidence that this sting-bearing plant was not just tolerated, but revered. As early as 2000 BCE, this plant was spun into thread and woven into fiber that clothed people as clothing, ropes, nets, ritual cloth. Warriors in Norse traditions were said to have worn nettle-woven tunics under their armor because its coarse integrity could guard not just the body, but the spirit as well. In Slavic and Baltic traditions, nettle fiber was worn as a protective talisman, believed to ward off evil spirits and sickness. And across the Himalayan communities, they still grow Himalayan nettle, Girardinia diversifolia, for cloth that's valued for its silk-like durability and water resistance, and used for ceremonial textiles. Nettle fiber was not a band-aid in history. It was foundational. During times of war and scarcity in Europe, when cotton and flax were off limits or inaccessible, nettle was called on again and again to clothe people. In Germany, during World War I, over 2 million kilograms of nettle were harvested for use in military uniforms. She has clothed revolutionaries and laborers, warriors and grandmothers, not with luxury, but with grit, with continuity, with the quiet assurance of a plant that offers its sting and its thread in equal measure. To wear nettle was to invite its medicine to the surface, to keep its signature close to the skin, to be swaddled not in softness, but in sovereignty. Their roots are deep, but their presence is immediate. They sting to protect, to awaken and bring life back to the surface. Section 4, sting as myth, sting as signal. In many cultures and for centuries, nettle has been deployed not just medicinally, but mythically. She's been charged with a power so strong and unmissable that her sting reads as feral, a plant meant to awaken, to incite. She is the threshold herald, the shelter weaver, the face of Earth's own spitting energy. In Norse lore, she was sacred to Thor, the thunder god, whose bolts of lightning would only strike where nettle grew. In Slavic traditions, she was used to hit the sick awake. In Celtic folklore, she guarded doorways, protecting not just the entrances to one's home, but the doorways between worlds. Always the edge walker, always the alarm. In a time when so many have numbed out, this sting is not a punishment, it's a call. Even her name, Nettle, carries this edge. From the Old English nettle, it is the same root as the verb to needle, a verb of discomfort and urgency. This urgency pulses in her ecology as well. Nettle is what ecologists call a ruderal species, meaning she shows up in places that have been recently disturbed. After a fire, after a flood, a landslide, a human disruption, she arrives first, stabilizing, shielding, reclaiming, and her sting makes sure she's not stepped on, that she's not grazed to extinction, that her medicine is honored. She surfaces where the soil's been ripped, and she surfaces in us. We see it in the body too. In a vitalist framework, the tissues Nettle most affects, the blood, the skin, the kidneys, the nerves, are all tissues that are most affected by stress, toxicity, and collapse. And she does more than treat them, she shakes them. This is what makes Nettle a signal plant. One of those plant allies that doesn't just have an action on the body, but a specific message for it. She does not sneak up on you. She does not comfort first. She arrives with fire. And in times like these, when the world is on fire, when the systems unravel, and when so many shut down, what greater teacher than a plant who insists that we wake up? Because maybe healing shouldn't begin with soothing. Maybe it just begins with sensation. Call to action, Section 5. To enter a relationship with Nettle is to enter into a contract that you will not fall back asleep, that you will let the sting reorient your purpose, that you will meet friction not as punishment, but as initiation. Nettle does not promise ease, but they do offer alignment. Not the pastel kind, not the kind you can cut into a logo, the kind that roots you back into Earth's own raw voltage and says, feel this. If you are cold and collapsing, they bring heat. If you are damp and heavy, they bring movement. If you are numb, they bring sensation. If you are sick of watching the world fall apart while your feed scrolls on autopilot, they bring an edge sharp enough to cut through the trance. There's a kind of silence that must occur before action. Not the silence of turning away, but of holding, of listening, of bearing the weight. Not fixing, not bypassing, just staying, even when it's unbearable. Grief, in its most literal sense, is a declaration. This matters. What's happening matters. That someone, somewhere, is still capable of feeling. That the erasure of the Palestinian people, the incinerated lungs of the earth, the slow suffocation of all those targeted by empire, penetrates you, alters you, dwells in your chest like a fissure that won't close. To feel this pain without trying to reframe, resolve, or make it useful is a radical act. Grief here is solidarity. No solution required. No productivity necessary. It is presence, raw, unshielding, the full-bodied refusal to look away. And that refusal, sustained, rips holes in the trance of empire. The weight you carry with the world becomes a tether, vibrates in coherence with the ache of another. In quantum terms, it's coherence. In spirit terms, it's kinship. You are not alone. And the moment that you taste that, truly taste it, you become an antenna, a signal booster for the pulse of resistance, the frequency of life insisting on itself. As Martine Prechtel says, grief is praise. Because it is the natural way, love honors what it misses. To grieve this world is to declare your allegiance to presence, to memory, to all that is still sacred to save. And that matters. It might be the only thing that ever has. Because the war is spiritual as much as it is material. And because fascism is nourished by disconnection. Because the first casualty of empire is imagination. To imagine a world where this violence has been unseated, where the waters are clear, the skies soundless, the people fed and free, is not a fantasy. It is strategy. To hold that vision is to become a portal, a vector for coherence, a place where the future can land. To choose this plant is to choose life. To walk with them is to say, I will not abandon earth. I will stay. I will witness. I will defend the sacred. Even when it stings. Even when I lose friends. Even when the algorithms punish me. Even when I am the only one who refuses to look away.